Hello, friends. Welcome back to C Club's podcast. I'm your host, Jess, and today we're joined by Pandy Marino, our very, very own Pandy Marino. Pandy is the steward of the community team here at C Club and has been a high-impact collaborator with us for the past few months. And today we talk about, well, how she ended up here. We talk about her search for clarity, the frustration that drove her away from Web2 communities and into the Web3 rabbit hole. And of course, we dove into a bunch of the tools and techniques she used to be a high impact collaborator right out of the gate. So I think you're going to be hearing a lot more from Pandy in the future. Very stoked to have her on the pod today. So let's jump into it. Pandy, welcome to Club.
Jess, thank you. Glad to be here.
So, okay, lots to get into. We're diving in. I think you might be the last episode of our contributor series, a contributor from close to home within the C Club ecosystem. But before we get into all of that stuff, which I think will be a juicy pile to get into, what were you, who are you? Hi.
Hi. Who am I? I don't know. I guess in my previous Web2 life, I became somewhat of a generalist, where I was scaling Web2 organizations, mostly in the media, audience building, and e-commerce spaces. Did a lot of work in the creator economy specifically. Contributed to building some brands you may know, like Herb, a cannabis media platform and community, and also the original show, All Gas, No Breaks. Throughout my journey, I was kind of exposed to a few mistakes and really important lessons that ultimately guided me here. Yeah, these circumstances, it kind of pushed me to find a better solution for creators and media, to try and find a way that humans could participate meaningfully in organizational structures. Twitter was a thing that I did sometimes, just on the back burner. Didn't really tweet ever, but I read a lot, and it led me down the crypto rabbit hole. I started exploring and reading about these things called tokenized communities, ? And I kind of imagined what that might mean for the future of creator economy and also just organizations in general. As I got further down the rabbit hole, all arrows were pointing to Seed Club. And alas, here I am. I connected with you, connected with Nicole, and the rest is kind of history.
Yes, so much in there. I think what I've always found interesting about our conversations, well, first of all, what is your role in the Seed Club world?
I am the community steward at Seed Club, officially.
Officially. So your role is to help support the creation of community across the various working groups or initiatives that Seed Club rolls out. And I think, even thinking back to one of our first conversations, I think it was what really stood out was just how much you've been doing this work for years in systems that just felt it consistently led to a lot of sort of less than ideal outcomes. I'm wondering if you can maybe just drill down a little bit on that. What were the types of things people were hiring you to go do, and what were the issues with those business models that kept leading to frustration for yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that ultimately, my frustrations came from two directions. It was sort of an empathy or a sympathy and compassion for creators that I was working with, and also the same sort of feelings for myself as a participant and contributor to these organizations and projects. I think what might be most useful is I kind of frame it as the lessons I learned or the situations that I went through and kind of what I was exposed to that led me here. So I think one thing that I learned was building solely for revenue at the expense of your community or users, it never works out. I think a second thing is power by force and power by position or title is definitely not the way to run an organization. There's this quote that I recently read that was give someone monarch-like authority and sooner or later there will be a royal screw up. And I think I've kind of encountered this in a couple different ways. And another one was creators giving up ownership and their IP in exchange for anything is never really a good situation. And yeah, I think I was kind of this person who was brought on in some capacity to grow and scale businesses, mostly grow audiences and grow revenue numbers. And when you're thinking about projects in terms of metrics like revenue and output, you neglect the creators and the people who are actually behind putting these projects out there. And that leads me to like my most important takeaway and my most important lesson, which is ultimately we need to put humans first always.
Okay, so those are good lessons that I see tie into a number of the conversations we've had. I'm curious on the first part, this tension between growing revenue and growing value to your community. Can you dive into that a bit more?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can like be pretty specific. I don't know how specific I should be, but whatever. Screw it. Basically, when I was at working at the cannabis media company, we had an audience of 15 million people. It was the most, probably like the top engaged Facebook page that was on Facebook at the time. People were consistently sharing stories, interacting with others, purchasing products, interacting with the brands that we were partnering with. People were super, super engaged. We had this opportunity to like lean into community further and potentially build this kind of platform for them to interact with each other and interact with the plant and our content that we were making. Whether that was like anonymous participation, a forum type of structure for people to share their stories and lessons and learnings and challenges from, whether it was a platform for people to create content around this magnificent plant. The options were really endless, and it was kind of clear that this is like something that our community clearly wanted to participate in. Unfortunately, in the cannabis industry, things weren't so black and white. It was a very gray time, and with legalization coming about, it really threw a wrench into our business operations and how we were operating as a media company. And so it wasn't necessarily our fault that we didn't pursue a community-driven or community-based project, but we ultimately had to pivot to building technology. One, because of the regulations. Two, because of the limited potential for revenue and brand partnerships because of the legalization of cannabis. And three, because that was what was going to bring in the most revenue from a business perspective. So yeah, I guess like when we had to make that pivot, we started to neglect the community at the core. And I think this led to, it was intentional, but it was also a very difficult period of time that we had to go through. Trade-offs had to be made, and lessons were certainly learned.
So like the idea being that a community in and of itself is probably not a good business, definitely not a venture backable business. And therefore, unless we're going to see BuzzFeed-like scale in the media side, we need to default to building tools if we want to see a return for investors. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
And so what do you see as being different now? What is the solution that Web3 offers? Maybe not that specifically, but that type of thing generally.
I think like communities, they've existed forever. Self-managing organizations have also existed. Like it's not new, but I think DAOs specifically, or at least the ones that I have exposure to, and this is specifically, I think, social DAOs, they're providing a unique opportunity to allow for meaningful participation within a community. And it's meaningful, I think, because you're connected through shared purpose and you're also building wealth together. That aspect of participation through tokens or NFTs is pretty new.
Yeah, I agree. So is there anything else sort of meaningful from those, I think you went through 4 or 5 lists of lessons. Like what do you see as being like the most clearly solved, or at least on the path to being solved, given the work you're doing at C Club today?
I think just going off of this participation concept, I think like lean startups, and that has been my experience in Web2, they're fairly self-organizing by nature. You know, you have a small team of core contributors that are all just wearing a million different hats working towards the same purpose. The thing is though, like as organizations in the traditional world start to scale, is that these lean structures start to diminish and you have a more like corporate, established, hierarchical, scalable structure that happens. And so like this impacted me specifically because in my experience, a decision I once had heavy influence on participating in, I no longer got to participate in, whether that was the allocation of resources, the projects we pursued, the decisions that we made that ultimately would affect me and my teammates. I no longer got to participate in. And so I think that is something that's really exciting, and I'm seeing these different org designs and structures pop up that are solving for this, which I'm so excited about.
I love that. I think big questions as far as like, how is that inherent to early stage teams, or can we actually scale those? I mean, I guess at a very basic level, you have far more involvement in decisions regardless as being a token holder than just a lowly employee. But I'm curious to see if that's sort of like a byproduct of timing, or if we can actually have org structures that support that. My guess is probably maybe. Okay, well, so there's a whole lot of things I want to jump into as far as like your involvement in C Club, because I think this sort of like, we're talking about contributors, a lot around, people's belief systems and how they got into it. For you specifically, I'm really interested in like joining and then hitting the ground running, because I think you did an exceptional job of that. And there's probably some things to unpack there. Going from the zero to a part of C Club, like what was the discovery and joining process like for you?
It was just like a full dive in headfirst moment for me. Just to give some context, I guess, like I'm really the type of person who enjoys going deep and staying super focused. It's really the only way I feel like I can solve meaningful problems. So after dipping my toes into Seed Club and just having initial conversations with yourself and Nicole and a couple other contributors, I kind of decided like, okay, I'm not going to actively contribute or like pursue other DAOs for now. I am, however, really grateful and think that it's really important that by the nature of Seed Club's accelerator, I do get to learn about a lot of the incredible projects in the DAO ecosystem, because I do think that broader ecosystem context is really important. Ultimately, I think I came for the learning, as I was mentioning before, but I ended up staying for the people. Y'all are awesome. Yeah, my involvement, I think there was like an immediate, and this became clear after speaking with you, Nicole, is that there was an immediate need for communications and content support, both around the accelerator, but also around the token launch. And with that, this like little side project that was super small started to emerge. That was the Discord reorganization project, working with Marv from Tiny Mixtapes and Gnosis. Hey, Marv, love you. It started as a really small project that was emerging. It became quite a significant project. And there were a few barriers that we kind of encountered going through this. One of them, I think, was how open the Discord was to the public. 2 was how little visibility I really had into the accelerator at that initial time. And 3, there wasn't like a whole lot of context, clarity, or objectives, or even a purpose statement to guide me on my path. And thus begins the search for clarity.
Do you have a piece of paper in front of you right now with notes on it?
I'm reading, I just marked 1 from the Discord project, those 3 barriers.
Okay, I love it. I'm like, she's prepping for this. Okay, the search for clarity, literally, this might be the title of this episode. It's definitely want to get into, but I think like there is still a lot of focus on like how do you get into DAOs, and I think there's this like, even watched you sort of go back and forth, or I think you probably still do grapple with this question of like, how easy is right? How easy is too easy? What's the right amount of friction or barriers, or who gets what information, etc. But specifically around like early contributors, you were just very aggressive in getting on people's calendars and showing up and being, and I say aggressive in like the best possible use of that word. You're just like there. And so have you seen that changing quite a bit? Like, is it easier for people to join now, or would that be a recommendation to your friends right now? Just like join the Discord that you're stoked on. If you feel a connection, ping any of the core team members until I talk to you, and then say yes to a small project.
Yeah, I think the best thing that I did was reach out. I found like a couple people who seemed interesting to me on Twitter, and I just hunted them down and was like, hey, talk to me if you feel called to. You were one of the people that I messaged. I also think I messaged Rafa and maybe a couple other people. A few got back to me, a few didn't, and that's totally okay. What ultimately led me to where I am now is just like following my nose of curiosity and not giving up until someone gave me some sort of answer or direction. And so I think that's really important from a contributor's perspective. Like if you're interested in getting involved, you have to we're at the time now where you have to actively go out and search for the things that feel right to you. Yeah.
And be on the flip side of that, folks that are in operations roles in these DAOs are having, I mean, God, how many meetings do you have a week, right? So people are having a lot of meetings. Some of those meetings are with new potential contributors or community members, or just saying yes to random DMs, of which, you know, your life gets busier and busier and busier. And so maybe say yes to fewer of those, but still saying yes to those, because there's always no shortage of things to get done. And then my recollection of talking to you was being like, oh, this human being has done a bunch of very, very relevant work, maybe not directly in Web3, but we have this problem of communication and audience building and community development. And so it was a pretty obvious heck yes on our end, I think, as soon as you kind of showed up. So there's a bunch of, I think like this onboarding challenge is really more of one of like a matchmaking. This probably looks, it's more like a marketplace than anything else. And it's finding talented skills and vibe, along with, usually the big barrier is like, well, what the heck could you do in this world? There's a pretty clear path for you to do that. But I will say that the process of sort of uncovering how to solve that problem definitely led to what we're calling it, the great hunt for clarity. Is that what we're calling it? The hunt for clarity.
The search for clarity.
The search for clarity. Okay, search. Sorry. Yeah, the search for clarity. So, yeah, I think outside of like, how do you find yourself working within C Club, which I think is the first step for many. I think what I watched you do, I've actually seen it fairly consistently, right? You kind of get dropped into this really early stage organization that is more chaotic than a normal early stage organization, which are normally chaotic as well, due to the nature of membership and ownership within C Club or within the organization. You need to kind of find a way to be helpful. And that's like the next challenge, right? So as an organization, we find somebody who can, we hope, solve some of these, one of the long list of challenges or problems we have. But there's this huge sort of time cost to onboarding, which is like dealing with the information asymmetry, and then also just like all like the organizational debt that just exists from trying to build and run. And so what I've watched you do is very quickly iterate on something that'll probably become a process of how to make sense of and make progress in a DAO in a very short period of time. But I wonder if you can take us back to like the moment you kind of joined, and you're probably sitting there going, okay, well, like now what? What did you do?
Yeah, when I first joined, it wasn't obvious that I would be contributing in a community capacity. I think what's interesting about community too is like these roles that have emerged within Web2, like community manager, director of community, chief community officer, they seem to be like reactions because of the lack of focus on humans and connection that has happened in traditional corporate structures. And so as I look forward, I think that community, it's such a broad term, and it truly is everything at Seed Club. And I think that's the way that organizations will evolve and should evolve, is with community at the core. Anyways, I went on a tangent. But when I first was getting started, I didn't really know that this is where I would end up. I think that I have like some competencies and some experience that line up pretty well to community and relationship building. And I think the way that it started was just community mapping. It wasn't clear to me who the core community members were at Seed Club. And after having several conversations, trying to get clarity and trying to get answers from the rest of the contributors, it became apparent that no one really had a clear answer for who the core community was at Seed Club. And I think it's specifically interesting because with the release of the token, it felt like token holders should be the core community of Seed Club. But it's also additionally interesting that with a non-official liquidity pool, people were able to buy tokens and become supporters and members of this community. And so there's tons of different layers within our ecosystem, and it was really about bringing clarity to who these members were and how they interacted with each other. And that's how this search really started.
And that's the search for clarity. I feel like you just need to end any of your comments with that. Yeah, I think like so like you specifically mentioned audience or community mapping there. I think what I would say was, if I zoomed out and said was the most useful thing that I saw you do consistently, was take the time to think it through. And the way you did that was through a lot more visual. So Figma with circles, tons of circles, and other sort of connection points that kind of said, hey, this is our world. I think for many of us, taking the time to step away from doing the specific thing that might drive the outcome, which might be the Discord reorg, or it might be writing messaging for one of these buckets, to get a sense of the lay of the land was, I'm sure, very helpful for you, but it did things that we had never done as an organization generally. And so the leadership shone through bringing in a tool that was about making clear the relationships between the various parties in our ecosystem as a way of moving forward faster was just very, very useful. And the fact that we hadn't done that yet, I think, just speaks to how not normal it is for that to be part of like the first step. So recognizing the information asymmetry that lives there, having a tool in your tool belt that allowed you to come and make sense of that sort of stuff, being very frustrated until it was clear, and then also doing that in sort of a semi-public way, at least with our sort of core team. To me, that was like a big unlock.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that and you airing that. I think what also was super important to me was I knew that this context would be a massive unlock for not only the contributors on the team and the community within the ecosystem, but also to any other contributors that wanted to participate in some sort of way within Seed Club's network. And I think like as a contributor, as part of the core team, something that feels really important to my work is not only like searching and seeking and finding the clarity, but being able to package it in a way that's useful for other people.
Yeah, that's a great call out. One of the interesting challenges that we're diving into right now within Seed Club is, as part of this process of opening up, we've token out to the world. Now we have working groups that are being stood up, and the majority of the work is going to be done through these sort of independent working groups. There's budgeting processes, and there's things that are going to allow us to run a lot faster, but that we've needed to put focus on. And one of the conversations that sort of stands out that we've had amongst many was this idea of decision-making and leadership, and ultimately, like, what is the role of a steward or a leader in these working groups? I know you sort of talked about early on, like one of the ideal solutions, I guess, from Web3 is this idea of being closer to the decision and not having as the organization grows, that you sort of are removed from that early stage team feeling. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that org structure, or if there was any unlocks or lessons you learned as you were coming in and being an operator and ultimately leading one of these working groups.
Yeah, I mean, I do spend a lot of time thinking and reflecting on this. I think ultimately, like, I want to build an organization that is just better. I don't really know how to word it other than just better. I think like my responsibility, or how I see the way that like I will work and continue to work, is just to like give clarity, bring context, collaborate on objective setting, and ultimately just like be in service to the rest of the team and the rest of the network, actually, because we are the community team. I think this idea of like self-organizing or self-managing organizations is really interesting, especially because it's not new. As I've kind of explored this in greater depth to kind of like feel out what direction Seed Club might take, I've encountered several examples that have really just like caught my eye. Examples of organizations that are just a bit more flat. It leads to like more freedom and more autonomy. And it doesn't mean like freedom to do whatever. I think in order for somebody to feel free, they need to be aware of the constraints in which they can operate. But to do that effectively as a community steward or a leader in Seed Club is just creating an organizational design and operational structures that facilitate that.
I think that sort of that context building and support, I think that was the biggest shift that sort of stood out to me in that conversation is just how, moving even from using the word decision maker to steward, which we and a number of other DAOs use, I think is big. And it's at the core, what a decision maker does is making decisions. And what a steward does is create the dynamics for, the best decisions and work to be done there, whether you have them or not. My guess is we're going to see more of a dance between DAOs and organization over the next little while, as so many of these challenges are just ultimately human being challenges and hopefully get supported by technology, but a little distant from that right now. I'm curious if we sort of shift for the last bit of our conversation here to some of like the specific lessons or impacts you're having on DAO contributors, given now that you're firmly rooted within C Club and have turned most of your thoughts to thinking through about how you build a team and what a great team looks like and what we should be working on. So can you maybe give us a high level, as a steward of the community team, what does community do within C Club and how are you approaching it?
Community is the connective tissue within the C Club ecosystem. If you think about, so I'm reading this book called The Hidden Life of Trees. This conversation about mycelium network has come up several times with conversations, different people like Flex, in our purpose discussion, as well as the founder of, is it Celo or Cello? I always mess that up. Anyways, if you think of C Club as this mycelium network, we're really this knowledge sharing system and information exchange system between our forest, which would be our projects. And it's beyond this kind of like education and learning and information sharing, but it's also, we enable this co-regulation of our ecosystem where projects can support each other through our network. And within that, there's a lot of different layers. There's a lot of different things that need to happen to be able to run an efficient system. And so that's really where I see the community team coming in. It's diving in, it's creating relationships, it's developing programs and activities that are really in service of the connections of our ecosystem.
The connective tissue. Yeah, I think the interesting thing is sort of watching you think through where in the organization should community. One of the challenges when you deal with a term like community, as you sort of alluded to earlier, is like it could just be the thing. Like we are talking about tokenized communities here at some level. So how does, if you're drawing circles and trying to make sense of like where's focus and who are the players on the board here, you could very easily put community at the center. But, you know, the work that your team's done is sort of push community off to the side and it acts as more of a service structure within C Club organization, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of brings me back full circle to like the thing that I mentioned before about the standard operations of what a community team might look like in traditional orgs, or Web2 rather. And yeah, I think it's, you know, we've established this circular system where we are able to kind of like integrate laterally and develop this like lattice of communication with other teams. But I'm not sure if that's what will always be the case or if a different structure will emerge.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, it's changed fairly drastically in the last little while. I think for me, like the biggest takeaway is constantly knowing the importance of focus and how incredibly challenging it is to do that in Web3 generally, but consistently seeing the benefits. So it's like intellectually understanding the benefit of focus, practically having a very challenging time doing that as there's so many fun things happening. And then also ultimately when we focus, just seeing the progress that'll come from that. You really brought me to the point where it became very clear to me that we do have a very clear community within C Club, and it's not all the people just yet that we were ideally serving. And so a refocus on our alumni, I think I would say it's people building projects, people who've built projects, or people who are supporting the builders of projects. And that's kind of like the core of community at C Club, even though there's 14 other different tentacles of which are filled with many people that we know and love and like and want to continue to support. But decisions are being made through the lens of like, how do we support this core group first, which I think is going to have fairly big impacts for us moving forward.
Yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot to figure out. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to learn. I think these next 3 months, and even tighter than that, these next 2 weeks are really going to be about focusing on collecting learnings from our alumni projects and our accelerator projects and our collaborators, and figuring out what are the things that they want to participate in, how do they want to participate, what challenges are they currently facing, what burning questions do they have, and really taking a moment to like reflect and collect this information so that we can develop programs and initiatives that are in service of what they want.
To me, this is like when I sit back and think about contributors in C Club, what gets me so excited is just how totally not the same way we would approach these things. Like, my default is just to be like, F it, let's go. We'll figure it out. Let's just keep making decisions and running. And very, very useful skill for part of the starting of a thing, and then probably incredibly unuseful for the growing of the thing. And so we're in the space now within C Club where there are a group of incredible human beings with groups of incredible human beings that are sort of leaning in and building stuff. And yeah, I think the fact that C Club is being made so much better every single day by so many different people is, I hope anybody out there that's building a DAO right now gets to experience the joy of that, to see somebody come in and say, hey, let's make sense of what's happening in community here, and do it to such a level that is so much better than I could ever even imagine doing myself, or even others on our team doing. And just starting to see this sort of like talent and skills and brilliance network grow is, yeah, pretty exciting. I'm here for a world where we can make more of that happen.
Me too. I'm having the most fun that I've ever had working with people that I've trusted more than I've ever trusted others before. And I'm just learning so much every single day from everyone on the team. And it's just an incredible experience, truly.
Yeah, it's fun. That trust thing is super interesting.
Oh, trust is everything, truly.
I guess it's tough to measure from the outside. I'm just, go back to the conversations we were talking about, like, what is a good project within C Club? And you think about just the trust coefficient, if that even is a thing, between teams or between community and instigators. That'd be one to have a look at, because going from 0 to 1 is just a progressive game of make believe until you get it off the ground. So trust is important in the game playing.
Totally. Yeah. And I think this trust is something that plays into like developing a team of contributors as well. Like, from a steward's perspective, it's kind of like you earn trust by like setting clear direction, making sure that the contributors have the tools and the resources and the clarity and the context that they need. And like you're able to just kind of like get out of the way in a sense, which I think like the reason I've been able to develop trust is because I was able to come in and figure out like what my interests and curiosities were, what my strengths were in terms of like skill set and experience, and also the needs of the DAO. And then I was able to like propose where I would fit in, right? Like, I made a sample job description based on the direction and the tools and resources that I had been given. And I think like that relationship up front was one that really like created a lot of trust between us.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious if maybe we can leave people with some tools or tips. I didn't talk to you about this beforehand, but I see a downloadable guide or dare I say even a book in your future around these very helpful visual brainstorming tools or games to be done with contributors. I feel like you probably have a whole list of these things that you're waiting to break out for us, and I've only experienced a handful of them. Maybe you're creating them right beforehand, but that's fine. That's perfect. I'll just assume that you have this amazing backlog. Are there some tools that we could leave people with, specifically thinking about that contributor thing you did the other day?
I mean, I can upload a template if that's what you mean.
Well, okay, where are you looking for? Like the idea of like, how do you bring people together, get ideas out, advance a conversation visually is something that you've done a lot of over the last little while. Where are you looking for tips or insights or inspiration in that pursuit?
Yeah, it's, I guess, just been a series of experiences that I've been exposed to and had to bring a lot of people into a room and evaluate options and opinions in a quick amount of time. And discussion can only get you so far. So I definitely recommend moving it to a visual framework where you can actually collaborate. So I use FigJam, which has been super helpful.
We like the FigJam. I feel like I get to bring a tool for you, Pandy, that you might have not heard of before, but can be an insight and inspiration goldmine. It's called game storming. Have you heard of this?
I haven't. Please fill me in.
Okay. Game storming. It's a book. Probably would have been a DAO if it started today. It's basically like visual brainstorming tools. Came out of the same era of like design thinking more generally. But it's just basically a crowdsourced group of workshop ideas or games essentially that help bring groups of people together and do a variety of things, like whether it's identify more opportunities, make decisions, do both. Game Storming, it's a book. It's also a website that has all the games up on it. And we did some of that earlier this week as we were getting into our outcomes discussion, but a mixture of really basic tools, post-up, affinity mapping, etc., all the way through to like a way of tying a bunch of those things together that might ultimately get you to a specific type of answer. So Game Storming, check it out. Very useful. I think it was always shocking to me back when I was using those as part of like my strategy consulting work that more and more teams didn't use those. And I think it's definitely growing quite a bit, but I'm having that deja vu situation here, which is like we're building these DAOs, trying to bring people together remotely on complicated topics. And yeah, we never really leaned in and used any of those tools until you started doing it. So
Totally.
we need more of it basically. And well, maybe we have to do something about that.
Yeah, I was on a call with David Spinks earlier, jamming on community, and a resource came up from CMX that David's team came up with called the 3-level community strategy framework. And it's very aligned with the framework of OKRs, which seems to be pretty common in Web3 DAOs specifically right now. So if you just Google it, the 3-level community strategy framework by CMX, it'll come up, and it's super helpful. It goes high level through business strategy, community strategy, and tactical strategy, and how all of those things speak to each other in terms of building out your community strategy, which we're going to be using moving forward. So I highly recommend looking into it.
Nothing like some real tools to end off a lovely conversation. Was there anything I didn't ask you that you wish that I had asked you, Pandy? Was there a note you had on your note page there? She's reading her note page.
I have to have notes. There's too much in my head.
I love it.
I won't be able to pull it out. Not really. I do want to call out this organization called Morningstar, which is, it's a tomato processing plant in California. And they're a really great case study on self-managing organizations. I actually was pretty blown away by the structure that they've put together and how it's serving them and their colleagues. They call all of their team members colleagues. And so, yeah, it's an HBR article, and I highly recommend any DAO operator to go through it and see if there's anything in there that could be useful.
Giddy up. Where can people find you on the internet, Pandy?
It's a mystery. Twitter is Pandy Marino. I tend to be pretty low-key on Twitter just because, I don't know, I'm more of a lurker than a creator, but maybe that'll change. But yeah, hit me up, DM me anytime if you want to chat about DAOs, contribution at DAOs, and if you have any general questions at all about community building. I'm always happy to help.
Pandy, I'm very stoked that we got to be your first podcast. I think we need to make it a mission that this is definitely not the last. Go take the community building mantra from the Sea Club shores out into the open ocean and any new discoveries that comes along its ways.
Thanks, Jess. I'm really excited for this podcast to suck ass and for us to just continuously improve. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, I guarantee it doesn't do that specific thing that you articulated specifically right there, Pandy Marino. Yeah, I don't know, folks. What do you think? Did she do a good job for her first podcast? I think so. We could have filled up like a 2-hour conversation of just diving into community discussions and like the trade-offs and decisions that have been made already, which I think will be useful at some point. But right now, I think you've just done an exceptional job of sort of navigating that DAO contributor hump into very high impact contributor. And so hopefully useful set of explanations or story here for others who may be in a similar boat, but definitely we're going to get you back on to dive into the nuances of the community building here at Sea Club. So Pandy, thank you for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you on the internet.
See you there, Jess.